So welcome. Thank you so much for coming to what is the first of a breakfast series that we're doing here on the Hill with Empowered Women. I'm Mindy Finn. I am the founder and president of Empowered Women, and our mission is to inspire, educate, and give voice to a bold new generation of American women, the leaders of today and tomorrow. And we're really seeking on a lot of the key policy issues in our country that focus on improving Americans' lives and kind of taking a fresh look. The women's space is a space that it seems like, women's equality and feminism is this huge cultural zeitgeist right now. It's super cool. Beyonce goes on to the VMAs with feminism behind her, and it's obviously a big topic in the election with Hillary Clinton running on the Democratic side. And, in our organization, my background, I've spent a little bit of time on the Hill. I spent time working on a series of campaigns, a couple of Republican presidential campaigns. I've had a focus kind of in digital media and politics, and worked at Twitter for a time, and took this turn recently to focus on women. And the reason that I was excited to go into digital media is that I saw that's where the world was moving, and it was giving power, empowering people in a way that it had not done before. And there was really this revolution that was going to impact our entire economy and every way that we operate in the U.S. And the other trend that I see that isn't new, but is clearly important from a policy perspective, is the rise of women in our economy. And frankly, I think the two are interrelated in that because the digital revolution is creating new opportunities for women in our economy. So I'm so thrilled to have this conversation today. I'm thrilled that we could join with Opportunity Lives as our sponsor for this conversation, who's focused on this issue, really led on it. And I'm thrilled to have Congresswoman Black, Congressman Diane Black from Tennessee here with us. Congresswoman Walorski here as well, and Aparna Mather from AEI, who is a PhD in economics and focuses on income inequality. Just interestingly enough, it's not just random that we have these two fantastic members of Congress with us here today. They both have personal experience on this issue. Congressman Black grew up in public housing in Glen Burnie, Maryland. She was the first person in her family to go to college. Congresswoman Walorski, as soon as she was married, she and her husband went and moved to Romania for several years, where they worked with impoverished children and on nonprofit programs that really helped those children. So they have a lot to offer, not just from their policy work, but from their personal experience. So, and then finally, we have John Hart, who is the editor-in-chief of Opportunity Lives, and he can speak a little bit about their work. But essentially, they're highlighting through their news organization examples of opportunity and how opportunity is alive in this country, and all the positive things that are happening, because you hear so often through the media just the negative and how terrible our country is, and they're focusing kind of showing the other side of that through their work. So with that, I want to turn it over to John, who's going to be kicking off our conversation this morning, and we really do hope that it's a discussion. We have other experts on this issue around the room, and after remarks and his questions, we hope that you'll chime in with your questions as well. Thank you so much again for coming out this morning on a morning where I know there's a lot of challenges with metro delays. So appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much, Mindy. It's an honor to be here. Again, I'm the editor-in-chief of a news site, conservative news site, called Opportunity Lives. And just a quick word on my background. It's a joy to be back in the Rayburg building, because I was an intern here in 1993. When Republicans were in the minority. And then my next internship after college was for a senator named Sam Brownback, and my supervisor was a young legislative director named Paul Ryan. So I have a long experience on the Hill. Wow. Worked for Senator Coburn, and then Jim DeMint, and then back to Coburn. So I've been in the trenches on trying to translate public policy, into real results and action. And one of the things that I learned the hard way over and over again was that the left is very good at storytelling, and we're very good at policy, and that's great. We have many policy experts here, but what we often fail to do as a movement is communicate heart to heart. So the left communicates heart to heart with story. We often communicate head to head. So when I left the Hill, there was an opportunity to work with this new news organization that was going to be focusing on connecting the head and the heart with compelling stories, with news, editorial content, and policy as well. We have a policy section on our site. So this is a natural partnership for us to do this event, and we're thrilled to be here. At the end of the program, we'll show a trailer, hopefully, for a video called Comeback that you may have heard of. And Comeback tells the incredible stories, inspiring stories of people overcoming poverty all across the country. And we focus on civil society groups that are part of a network that a gentleman named Bob Woodson has put together with the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. And when Speaker Ryan lost the race with Romney Ryan, he did a tour of all these groups because he realized, look, if we're going to have, if he's going to have credibility, he has to go in and listen and learn firsthand. So Comeback captures that tour, but the real star of the show, so to speak, are the people around the country doing this incredible work. So that'll give you a flavor of what our site is about. But to get the conversation going this morning, I thought it would be helpful. Mindy mentioned some of your backgrounds. Why don't each of you just take 2 or 3 minutes and tell a little bit about your personal story and why these issues are important to you.
It's great to be here. And Mindy, thank you so much for bringing people together. I think we really should have a room packed to the walls about this issue because it is one that its time has come. I want to begin by saying that Mindy mentioned Congresswoman Diane Black and then said Congressman. And I just want to set the record straight about why it is that I use the title Congressman, is because it is a title in the Constitution. And just as a woman goes to the first year of high school or the first year of college, we call her a freshman, not a fresh woman. So therefore, I am a congressman, and I don't usually correct people when they say congresswoman. I am fine with that. I'm not about titles, so, but that is the reason why you will hear people call me congressman, is because I see it as a title. As Mindy said, I was blessed. I was born into a family with a mom and a dad who were Depression-era parents, or Depression-era individuals, who did not have an education. My father went to the 6th grade, and my mom went to the 9th grade. And both of them worked very, very, very hard. And so when I was born, I had 2 older brothers, and then a younger sister came after me. We were raised in public housing in Baltimore City for the first 4 to 5. I was about almost 5 years old when we moved out into the county, into Glen Burnie. You may be familiar with that since it's so close. Even at that, when we moved into the little house that my parents still live in, my mother's 91 and my father's 90. I just went over to visit her yesterday and made her some chicken noodle soup to say how much I love them for the way that they brought me up with hard work. I mean, that's what we were brought up to learn, is hard work. Unfortunately, my parents, because they didn't have an education, felt like if you graduated from high school, you had attained success and that you should just go on and get a job. And they thought that we should just get a job in government because that gave you a good, solid opportunity. And I was fortunate that I had someone in my high school years, a high school counselor, who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And he helped me realize a dream that I'd had that my mother talks about when I was 4 years old. I said I wanted to be a doctor, not a nurse, but a doctor. But knowing that we didn't have the money and I didn't have the ability to be a physician, my high school counselor said, why don't you go to school to be a nurse? I said, I can't do that. When I went home and told my mother this, that I was going to go to college, she even said, I'm sorry, we don't have the money to do that. You're not going to be able to do that. But he helped me through high school to realize that good grades, working hard, could get me a scholarship. And the Optimist Club awarded me a scholarship as Girl of the Year, and I got to go to Anne Arundel Community College and get my 2-year degree there. Of course, I went on to get my bachelor's degree, but that was after I was an adult. So I know what it's like to work hard. I know what it's like to come from a space where you don't even know how to dream. And I think that's really what, for me, that makes the difference for anyone who's in poverty, but more especially for me. I have a heart for young girls and helping them to be able to see the dream and dream that dream so that they can attain more than they ever thought that they could attain. So I'm very blessed, married to a wonderful man. We've had a successful business life together, 3 children and 6 grandchildren, and now to serve in Congress, coming from where we started in public housing to the halls of Congress. It's just a really fine story that I like to share with young girls. Jackie?
Thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to be here this morning. I very much appreciate you coming. And, I'm from a blue collar, double income household. My dad was a fireman. He's an Air Force veteran fireman. And my mom was a meat cutter. And you talk about hard work, my parents were hard workers. And middle class, I was a first generation college student that went to college and basically borrowed most of the money, paid it off 10 years after I was married, did the government shtick. But I went from there into TV broadcasting. From there I went into development work and started raising funds for places like Indiana University in Indiana that would, to help them actually get education programs available to rural areas in Indiana. So I did that for 6, 7, 8 years. My husband and I got married. My husband is a professional sax player, also a music teacher, also a music professor. And our church asked us if we'd go to Romania, live in Bucharest for 2 years, do really non-traditional mission work kind of stuff. And at the time, Romania in the 80s and 90s was all over 60 Minutes, all these news programs here of all these kids living in the sewers below ground, all running away from orphanages under the heavy oppression of Ceausescu during communism before the nation revolted and became part of the revolution in 1989. So Dean and I went, we sold our stuff, we sold our house, we sold everything we had. We raised the money for 2 years. The night before we got on the plane, our pastor called and said, the organization that you're going to work with just folded. And so my husband looked at me and said, my husband, the true patriarch of our family, he said, I really believe this is a God thing, not a man thing. I think we need to go. The pragmatist American here, I look at my husband and I said, we're Americans. And no matter where we go, we can come back and reinvent ourselves if we fail. We are not bound to any decision like this because there's no country on the face of the earth that exists like this nation, that you can be whatever you want to be and the opportunities are endless. So we went and we got off the plane and I was telling somebody earlier this morning, I'm 6 feet tall and my husband's 6'6". So Romanians by stature are Eastern European, so they're smaller. So we learned to speak the language fluently. We were tutored the whole time we were there. And when we got off the plane, it was still very dark, very drab, no color in the country, no color on the buildings, very gray. We get off the plane and here's the Romanian security guards at the airport with the old Russian machine guns, gray drab uniforms. And we get off the plane and we watch their eyes go up like this. And understanding the language later, they said to each other, oh my God, the Giants are here. And so we kept ourselves very secure because people thought like that he was a basketball player and that I had to be some kind of like volleyball player. So we got along great in the streets. We never got mugged. A lot of other Americans did. But anyway, I say all that to say this. So I would never be in Congress today had that opportunity not open and had we not taken the risk to literally risk it all. Selling all of our security, transitioning out of our jobs, and going and doing something like that. And so we landed on the ground with one phone number in our pocket. And the folks that, the whole program had totally disintegrated the night before. So we got there, and this is a nation with no lack of need. You could put a blindfold on when you got off the plane, shut your eyes, throw a dart at that board, and there's need. And the needs are horrific. So we did spend a lot of time in these underground sewers, working with these kids and feeding kids and actually adapting and adopting feeding programs for gypsy villages and connecting with programs that are American programs, just starting to seed into that area of Eastern Europe. And, the thing that changed my life forever, and the reason I'm in Congress today is because 9/11 happened when we were in Romania. So we were in the streets one day, and I get a call from some of these students that we were working with, and they said, hey, your nation's under attack, you really better get out of the street and get back into your apartment. And I literally hung up saying, yeah, sure. And then she called me right back and she said, seriously, you really need to get in your apartment. So we go back to the apartment, and for 36 hours with the rest of the Americans that were living abroad, we watched our nation under attack. We watched towers fall. They had shut off the airspace. We couldn't fly home. All the data communication centers were down. You couldn't contact home. And we really did not know if we'd ever see our families again or this country. That is a life-changing decision. And, I was so compelled watching what was happening. I said to my husband, I was like, you know what? I will never not do whatever I can humanly do to assure that this nation is safe. And so when I did get elected after 6 years in the Indiana State House, I fought to get on the Armed Services Committee and do my part to make sure this nation stays secure. And I have. But I also, now that's also led to this issue of chairing the subcommittee now on nutrition in the Ag Committee, and which is really looking at this issue of the reform of SNAP. And I've seen poverty in Eastern Europe. I've seen poverty in my district. The difference between the poverty in Eastern Europe and the poverty in my district is we are a nation of thinkers, and we are a nation of solution finders, and we are a nation of always creating opportunity. And so I'm in a position right now, sitting on this committee, where I can do something about it in this nation. And we are in the process right now of unlocking those doors of opportunity, especially to women that are bound in programs. And sometimes they can't get out. Sometimes they hit a fiscal cliff where they're trapped. But I'm so optimistic that by the end of the year, after we have already looked at this for 15 months in the weeds, there are ways in this country we can set people free. And not everybody wants to be set free, not everybody will be free. And there are vulnerable people in this country that will always have that safety net. But opportunity is the difference between our nation and every other nation, and the recreation of ourselves because of the resiliency of American, and especially with women. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'm such an honor to be here and to be sharing the panel with these two wonderful congressmen. I have nothing to parallel the stories that you told. Of course, I come from India. It's a very poor country. There's, you see poverty around you. As you said, when you go to Romania, you look around and it's everywhere. Even in the best parts of the country, you see people begging and people needing food and help. But specifically when you look at sort of women's issues, India is considered to be one of the worst countries to be a woman. You look at the top, you look at any ranking, it's one of the worst countries. You see the stories that you hear in the newspapers every day. And so when I came to the US, I came to the US in '99, did my PhD in economics from University of Maryland. And at AEI, a lot of my work has tended to focus on sort of poverty issues and inequality issues. Just what does it mean to have opportunity? And really, again, what you said, being in the US, you see how policy can change opportunity. That's really an experience that you learn. We really don't debate so much in India. You see a lot of arguments. You see people, fighting for, we need to do this and we need to do that. But the informed kind of debate that you see here and that you feel that you can actually contribute to and make a difference to is really an eye-opener here. And I think it's something that we can learn a lot from coming from India. And so while at AEI, a lot of my work has sort of focused on the policy side and just what can we do to improve economic opportunity, not just for women, but in general, for people living in poverty, for people at the bottom of the income distribution. How do we get them to move up? And since the topic of today's forum is really how do we help women, I sort of said, okay, what are the big challenges that we face going forward? So over the last few decades, we've seen many indicators, economic indicators for women improving. We've seen labor force participation rates have gone up over the last few decades. We've seen, this big gender gap, wage gap that used to be something like 50 cents on the dollar is today at something like 20 cents. And we've seen women out basically, earning many more college and professional degrees than men. But so there is some sort of convergence on how this gap between what women can achieve and what men can achieve. But if you start digging deeper into the details, like, what's going on with labor force participation? So yes, labor force participation rates have gone up, but I was looking at this interesting chart that the Bureau of Labor Statistics produces about really over the life cycle of the woman, how does labor force participation change? And you see that in their prime age years, which is where you are out there in the labor market, you're earning, developing great human capital, learning skills, job training, and so on, 50% of women are working part-time. Labor force participation rates there's a 15 percentage point gap between men in their 40s or 30s, participating in the labor market and women. So that's a huge gap. And if in your prime earning years, you're not out there in the labor market actively participating, then that really has an effect on your earnings. It has an effect on how financially secure you feel. There's a Pew survey out that shows that women feel more financially insecure. And when you start tying that up to what's happening in the labor market, it starts making a lot of sense. Women take up a lot of part-time jobs, women take up, irregular schedules, and a lot of that is driven by family, childcare responsibilities. And, so unless we really start talking about the issues so things like paid leave, things like, how do we help women pay for childcare? How do we help families pay for childcare? I think this is a great economic sort of resource that the country is losing out on. And so, and again, if you look at sort of the demographic changes over time, the share of households with single mothers has literally doubled over the last 3 decades. And what does that mean? Is that, sometimes you view it as, wow, these breadwinner moms, as Pew put it, who are literally, running their households and they're earning more than the spouses. But really, at the end of it, they're just a single parent. They're the ones providing for the household. And a lot of children, 50% of children growing up in these households are growing up in poverty. So what does that say about not just the country, but the potential for these families to rise up? What does that say about children growing up in these families, their ability to go to school, their ability to go to college? A lot of these children drop out of high school. And so, I'm interested in sort of the policy side of things. How can we change this? I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of policy, in terms of helping families meet the cost of childcare, having sort of a paid leave system in the U.S. which would benefit working women who can then get back to their jobs after the period of paid maternity leave. And that is really a stepping stone for success in this country, because if you don't have a job, if you're out of work, there's really not much you can do to provide for the family. There's not much you can do to provide for yourself. So I would love to discuss more of the policy ideas that we can adopt to help women, and not just women. This is really a fundamental issue for the country. How do we tap into this economic potential? That's this unused resource that's lying out there simply because we don't have the right set of policies in the country.
Well, in our conference, and I will give Kathy McMorris Rogers, who is a great leader, a lot of credit for continuing to move our conference forward in looking at how we can create an opportunity economy. One of the things that I hear consistently as I go throughout my district is there just aren't opportunities out there. What are the opportunities? And we've got to go back and look at what the policies are that we have been setting for at least the last 6 years that I have been here in Congress that keep the economy and keep the businesses down. So first of all, regulations. Regulations are just drowning companies. They will tell you over and over again, I can't grow because I'm spending my money on trying to meet all the regulations that you keep putting on us, rather than growing my business, creating new opportunities in our business, which give new opportunities in the community for more jobs. And so an opportunity society, an opportunity economy, means looking at what we're doing here in Washington to say, how are we squashing those opportunities down at the level of the businesses and the jobs? And I don't want to take up all the time because I know there are more ideas around the table, but one of the things that we have done and we've passed out of the House is called the REINS Act, that would rein in some of these rules and regulations that don't come out of Congress. They don't come out of debate and voting for those kinds of things in Congress. They come out of the executive branch, which means when those kinds of things happen, the people that this is affecting don't have a way to get to the bureaucrats that are making that decision. If I make that decision, they can say, I'm not going to vote for you again because you've put too much piled regulations on top of me. But when it comes from the executive branch, there's not a way for the electorate to get to them. And so what we have done is we have passed a bill called the REINS Act that would literally rein in on the executive branch by giving some of this power back to Congress to say, if that rule or regulation creates more than $100 million worth of stress on the economy, that it then has to come to Congress to be debated in an up or down vote. And that puts Congress back into the driver's seat again of recognizing that it's our role and responsibility to make sure that we're helping an economy, and we then will have a hand and a voice in it. So that's just one example, and I'm sure that Jackie can also talk about some of the other examples or
Yeah,
some of her
I
thoughts.
agree with Diane. I mean, it's a great example, and it's also the great example of starting to ratchet back that power from the executive branch and bring this place back into balance. But I would also point out, because I'm chairing the subcommittee on this, that, every issue that we talk about is a women's issue. Now, when I'm looking at this issue of SNAP, predominantly there are more women receiving SNAP because they're single parent households, they're single women with kids, and so there's more women involved in this. But I will tell you this, so as we try to untangle this mess as a general house, on the subcommittee, we're looking at how do we untangle a bureaucracy of entitlement money and set these people free that want to be free. Now, there are people that want to be free from entitlements. The problem is that and this is a great example, I was last January, when the speaker had asked me to chair this entitlement reform of SNAP, I asked him if I had a Kevlar vest and safety helmet issued to me, because I know how toxic this is gonna be. And, but in that same January last year, I went to speak to an AP government class in my district, really, really bright kids. This brave young girl stands up at the end of this class period because they know that I'm taking on this new role. And she stands up in front of all of her classmates, and this is an upper middle class group, and she says, Representative Walorski, my family receives food stamps. And you could have heard a pin drop in that room and the mouths of her colleagues, mostly male, smart kids, just about hit the floor. And so now she's standing up, everybody else is sitting down, she's looking at me, and she said, my father was an RV worker, making good money. We make all the RVs in the country. And she said, my mom and dad got divorced, and I've got 2 little siblings at home that my mom is trying to raise. My dad does pay child support. But she said, in order to make this happen, my mom has been on food stamps for the last several years and a couple of other entitlement programs, just trying to bridge that gap. She says to me, so she said, I want to break that poverty. I don't want to continue that cycle. So here's this brave woman. I'm mortified for her because you could see on her face how hard this was. And she said, so I went and got a job. And my income counted against my mom. And they lost all food stamps, all help.
Right.
So her mom was trapped in what we call this fiscal cliff. You get to a point where if anything happens out of your control, or your kids want to go be independent or whatever, you lose everything. And the reason I am really passionate about this is because what we are able to do really in this cycle right now, in this Congress, is create this ladder that allows people to get off with some kind of a scale, or allows people, the help that they need. There's always going to be vulnerable people. But for the people that want to be free and actually get jobs, have their kids get jobs, and actually start pursuing the opportunity the American dream actually provides for us, they're free. And I think this is, I'm excited about it because I think we can get there. I think we can get there this Congress with the direction that we do have and Paul's commitment as Speaker in this bridge of poverty. So I think that makes a huge difference in particularly impacting women, just because the stats are what they are. But the issue becomes, let's make some gradual ladders to get off of this without just an absolute shut the door, you're on your own, because then that same woman falls through a hole that if somebody doesn't get her out of, then we've lost another family. And there's other things that are in play here: social workers, domestic violence, job training on the spot, same place, easy to get, transportation to get there.
Transportation's a big issue.
Lot of issues that are coming together on this, but I really do see light at the end of the tunnel that we actually can do this.
And Bob Woodson's done a tremendous amount of work, and I had an opportunity to be with him and be with some of the women that shared with us some of the barriers that are there for them. One of those is, as you say, that cliff. We want that to be more of a slide than a cliff.
Yeah.
Let's find a way to help them. If they reach this, they don't just fall off,
Right.
but that we find a way to say, as long as you're continuing to work and make money, then you'll continue to get the subsidies that you need in order to keep you buoyed up until you can do it on your own. But he has done a tremendous job. And one of the things we heard consistently around the table from the women that are really working hard to try to get out of this cycle of poverty was transportation. They don't have enough money to buy a car. They don't have enough money for the insurance. They have unusual hours, as
Right.
you've talked about,
Goodness,
unusual
goodness,
hours
yeah.
that their employer expects them to work, and if they can't, then what do you do about that? So there are some barriers there that we have got to look at and listen. We've got to listen to what they're saying to us and help them to be able to reach their goals by filling in those spaces that they need in order to make them successful.
Right, and just, that's an excellent point that you raised about, I think Paul Ryan had a House Budget Committee report last year saying, look at all, we have 92 anti-poverty programs. And people just don't know what they're eligible for. The eligibility rules changed. Eligibility is contingent on, your family structure, how many children you have. You can be falling off the cliff on one program and be, on the cliff in the other. And a lot of, research and studies coming out show that if you're at $40,000, so many of these things suddenly, you lose out on food stamps, Medicaid, children's health insurance. You go off the cliff on so many of these tax credit programs and, anti-poverty programs that really you're losing like 50% of anything that you could potentially be earning in the labor market as a result of just going off these programs. So you really have to figure out a system where it doesn't hurt very low income people. Even somebody who's at $40,000 is really, very low income in this country, trying to support a family with 2 children. So we need to figure out, well, how do we phase this out for them at a slower rate so that these families can benefit from it? Also, looking at the labor market, I mean, a lot of women we saw this big spike in involuntary part-time work over the course of the recession. And it's a lot of women who are doing this involuntary part-time work. And, we really need to figure out ways, well, how do we get them back into full-time jobs? And some of that has to do with regulations. You look at the occupational licensing requirements. Those vary so much across states. Women are just, people are not able to deal with the mess that exists in that system. And just trying to get, businesses to sort of create more jobs in the country. Taxes are a great example of that. You look at our corporate tax rate. Businesses, why do we see so many inversions? These businesses are inverting because they're facing really high corporate tax rates in the country. And I don't think the solution is to say, well, you can't. This is unpatriotic. I think the solution is, well, let's, make our corporate tax code more competitive. So I think we need to, it's a lot of regulations, taxes, and how that translates to the labor market, and that we really need to worry about.
I want to give you an example of the regulations and looking back on my life when I was working full-time and trying to take care of children, because I became a single mom because I had a husband who dealt with the devil of alcoholism. And I was working full-time, and in order to supplement my income, I baked cakes. Now, I love baking cakes, and I love decorating cakes. And I happened to make one for the school for a children's party. And people would call me and say, would you make me a cake?
Would you make us a
So
cake?
I was
I want a cake.
I make great cakes. I really do. I love doing it. I love making pies and desserts. I started selling them. And I started to make a little extra income. Do you know today I would be closed down because I was making them in my house and I wouldn't have a license? Somebody who can braid hair. Someone who can do something that really shouldn't require a license to do. But because of the burden of that, women who have a lot of creativity can't use their creativity to start their own little business, their little cottage industries that would really help them out of the situation of poverty. And I look back over my shoulder and I think, wow, I probably would have been arrested because I would have said, you're not going to stop me from making
my
a cake.
cakes and selling them. Yeah.
I'd have been in school.
And that also feeds into what we're seeing in the sort of new gig economy. The Uber drivers. You see a lot of women taking up these jobs, much more than in the traditional taxi industry, because of the flexibility it offers, and you can choose your hours. And I think that again, if we start trying to regulate that industry and say, well, we really need to make this like the traditional taxi service, well, you're going to lose all these women who are suddenly finding this opportunity to provide the hours that they do have and earn an income and supplement family incomes.
Opportunity economy. Yes.
We're on message, that's good. Well, why don't we open it up? This is your time. You have the floor. Any questions? And
I actually have a question. So, first of all, thank you for coming this morning. This is a great discussion. So, my question is more about we've talked a lot about the women who are so far below that poverty line. They don't have access to transportation. They don't have, access to the jobs that they need. What about that group that is kind of right on the edge? And maybe they're paying their rent every month, and maybe they are able to make their car payments, but they're still relying on food stamps to make ends meet. And I often, I actually have members of my own family who are, are classified as group of people, and I think part of them have become comfortable living where, in that kind of state of being.
Yes.
So how do we motivate them also
Bless
have
you.
dependency on, you know, the food stamps? Or is it possible? I mean, I don't know that it's
is.
necessarily a regulatory fix as much
Yeah.
as it is a cultural one.
It is possible. And you know, you make a really good point. And that is that we measure our successes in the poverty arena by how many people are on it, rather than how many people get off of it. A really quick story, because we're running out of time. I met a young lady who had 4 children, all from different fathers, living in public housing, and we adopted her family for Christmas. And I thought, I'm going to get to know Brenda. And I would go and visit with her, and I said, you know, Brenda, if you could, because she was so smart, I said, if you could do anything that you could wanted to do, what would it be? She said, I want to be a nurse. I said, well, how about if I get you an opportunity to go to LPN school? Would you do it? Oh, but I have children. We're going to take care of the children. We're going to take care of your expenses. Went to the school 18 months, graduated at the top of her class. Beautiful. Everything was working perfectly. Okay, now she's going to get a job. 4 children. Where do you get a job right out of nursing? You're going to work nights. I went to a friend who owned a nursing facility, nursing home, and Brenda loved elderly people. Says, perfect, but I need you to let her work day shift because she cannot work nights. We can only get babysitters for her during the day. So, fine. She works there for about 3 months. Everybody loves her. I'm getting calls from Martha. This is great. She's a wonderful girl. All of a sudden, I get a call. She doesn't show up for work. It's like 3 days. And I said, well, I don't know what's wrong with her. Martha calls me and says, you know, is she sick or whatever? Go over and knock on her door. She opens the door. I said, Brenda, are you okay? Oh, yeah. Are the kids okay? Oh, yeah. Well, why aren't you at work? Well, I've just decided I can't do this. My grandmother was on welfare. My mother was on welfare. I've been raised on welfare. And what if I lose my job? I won't have a welfare check. And I said, you know what? You either go to work or I'm going to call the Department of Human Services and tell them you have a job and you're not working. You're not going to get a welfare check. Well, it forced her to go back to work. Guess what? She not only went back to work and became successful, 2 of her children right now have graduated from college. Cycle of poverty was broken, but she was so fearful. It had been a way of life for her. She didn't know anything else. And that's what we do when we trap people in this situation. We trap them into poverty thinking that they can't do anything else. And we've got to find a way in that system, as what has happened with Bob Woodson, is to go in there and show these folks there is a way, to give people that confidence that there's a way to break this cycle of poverty. And I think that's really what you're alluding to, is that people kind of get stuck there and don't know how to get out of it. That should be a part of what we do. Not just give them money for food stamps, not just give them money for housing, but to mentor them and help them get out. Because if I hadn't had a mentor, I wouldn't have gone to college. So mentorship is a big, important part of what is missing, in my opinion, in this whole equation of people being on public assistance.
Well, and I can tell you, my husband's a public school teacher. He has 800 kids a week. And so just in the last couple of years, you know, when he asks these kids when they come in, you know, what do you want to do when you grow up? You know, and it used to be answers of, you know, every little boy wanted to play football and every girl wanted to do, you know, want to be a nurse or whatever. Interestingly, in the last 2-3 years, because it's so embedded in the psyches of kids, this whole thing of poverty, it's so cyclical, as Diane just said. So my husband asked these little kids last year, what do you want to do when you grow up? You know, and 2 or 3 kids raised their hand, and he called on them, and they said, we want to get checks like our mom does. And my husband looks at him and says, well, where do you get the checks from? The mailbox. Well, don't you want to do anything? No, I want to play video games, and I'm going to get checks like my mom does. So that's why I think it's so important that we deal with these policy issues now. If we don't change policy and really get into an incentivizing network that opens up doors of opportunity, incentivizing, the more you work, the more help, the more this, the more that. And, you know, just in this past year, when most of the states with Republican governors just happens to be, you know, put a work requirement back in that was lost when President Obama during the whole recession said everybody that wants food stamps can get it, took all the reins off. The reins kind of started coming back on. I was reading an article last week when I was flying home that in Maine, they had like an 80% drop in their SNAP recipients based upon work. It was just work requirement. It was just even just getting a part-time job for the first time helped. Even just getting, you know, maybe picking up, like Diane in the cake business, picking up something on the side helped. And it literally started moving people off that. But if we don't do something policy-wise where it allows us to educate the American public as well, then we'll never reach those kids. I mean, we have to do something to incentivize the breaking of the poverty, or those kids, it's much like what was happening to my husband and I in Romania. You know, if there was an unlimited supply of money coming in from very, very well-respected organizations like the World Bank, the World Monetary Fund, you know, the UN, was bringing unprecedented amounts of money into a place where there wasn't a whole lot of hands to really decide what the strategy was. And what ended up happening in a place like Romania was we had ended up with a counterculture of multi-generational now, kids being raised by a bunch of money with nobody leading any kind of a direction to actually channel that into success for them. And now we have second and third generation kids in sewers with still untapped resources of people wanting to send money to that. You know, there's got to be a strategy, and I think that's how our policy plays in. It lends itself to a little bit of strategy.
We cannot talk about this as a money issue. This has got to be as a human issue. This
Set
is a
people free.
loss of people's lives when they're in that situation. I get so disturbed with my own colleagues when they say, well, look how much money we're spending. This
Yeah.
is not about money.
Money, yeah.
This is about people and their lives and who are they. You know, after you ask somebody, what is your name? What do you ask them?
What do you do?
What do you do?
Yeah.
And if you can't say what you do, then how do you feel about yourself?
Yeah.
And we trap them in that situation where we continue to give money and not mentor them out of the situation they're in. What a sad thing to say, that our life is wasted to never know what you can do, what your fullest potential is. Opportunity, opportunity, opportunity. That's what we ought to be talking about, not dollar signs, opportunity.
Can I ask a question really quickly? This is probably a question that you asked at the beginning of one of these things and not the end. I apologize. I enjoy doing these things, and thanks to Mindy and the folks for putting this together. Thank you both for being here and participating, all three of you. My question is really, how do we take the ideas and these types of conversations and take it to the next place? It seems like Speaker Ryan is obviously very committed to tackling these types of issues. I think a lot of times in these dialogues, we look at it through the lens of women, which I think is important. There are a lot of other issues that you alluded to in the women's space, childcare, paid leave,
Sure.
equal pay,
Right, yeah.
fixing that wage gap, et cetera. So my question is, how do we get to that next place, which is the poverty and opportunity work for task force, is that the place to do this so that next year we're sitting here talking about the legislative effort beyond what we talked about with respect to regulation? Because my concern is that we continue to talk and we're building that, you're building that in your subcommittee, this crescendo of conversation, this collection of ideas, but how do we get to the place where we're actually legislating and we're actually fixing the policy, which I think takes time, but it seems like you're heading in the right direction and there are some obvious barriers to sort of correct before you
I
get
think
there.
it's leadership, and I'm proud to say that we have leadership in our conference right now who's committed to this. We have Kathy McMorris Rogers at the top that keeps on talking about and encourages our members to use this same verbiage throughout wherever you go. It's an opportunity economy. And that means a lot of things, but then you got to put some meat to that, as you say. And that's what happened. That's what's happening in our task force, as we're looking at ways that we can set this agenda. So whoever the next person is that's in the White House, we will already have an agenda that's set. And Congress will then take its role back in having a voice in what really is happening. But you got to have willing partners all the way across the line. You can't do this without willing partners. So we can have ideas over here in the House, but we've got to be able to translate those to the Senate and then to have a willing president to be a partner in making these things happen. It's high time. This war on poverty, it started back with Johnson. We have been talking about a war on poverty. Well, goodness gracious, a 50-year war. It's about time we win this darn thing, isn't it?
Right.
And it's about time we look at the policies that have been there and say, have these worked? Are we done with the war? Have we won the war? No. In many cases, we are below where we were when we started back then. So it's leadership and it's partnership. And both of those things have to be there in order for us to really set policy and put it into place to make it move.
Well, and I think one of the differences that we're doing as compared to what's been done in the past, as I look at SNAP, we've looked at the past, present, future of SNAP, and we're looking at it from an evidence-based research team now, and working with Ways and Means, so we're actually working in conjunction with them. But it's not just based anymore on rhetoric, it's not just based on money
Good
per
point.
head. It's evidence-based research coming from, in some cases, University of Notre Dame. They've devoted an unbelievable amount of staff to this. So some of the Notre Dame researchers have been out here working with AEI very closely on both of these committees. And I think that the difference is, you know, my task as a subcommittee chairman, was not go in there and shotgun blast a bunch of bills and see what sticks to the wall. My task was go in there, get in the weeds and vet it and find out where the commonality is, educate the American public on evidence-based research, and then from that, we'll be able to basically add that to our bold agenda and ask whoever the president is to come along with an issue, not just shotgun blast, but rifled strategic approach, vetted in the weeds, run the gamut, ran the traps that of things that we can actually agree on and the American people can see for themselves. Because the evidence-based part of this has been vacant for so long, it's been rhetoric going back and forth. But I think that that's the difference. You know, whoever our nominee is, I don't know who that's gonna be, but you know, hopefully our nominee is able to stand up and not just take a bunch of bills, but to actually take the concepts and run on it to the American people on things that have already been vetted for them, that we can then take and make part of our national agenda. So I think that's one of the differences.
And at the end of the day, you gotta measure it.
Yeah,
Because if you
right.
don't
Gotta be.
measure it, then
Right.
you'll never know whether you're successful.
I just wanted to add, being from, I work for ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, that there's a lot of really great innovative things going on at the states too.
Oh,
And I
absolutely.
applaud everything you said here today, but, you know, homelessness, Utah and Texas are doing
Yeah.
some incredible things with
They are.
homelessness.
Good
I
point.
think we need to be careful remembering that incarceration is a huge issue that destroys families and usually leaves women vulnerable. And how we handle that issue, keeping people from ever falling on poverty.
Right.
My experience over the years, I've worked as a man, I know it's crazy, but I've worked poverty issues and women's issues for 30 years. Came from California. But, you know, I think, you know, we have to look at the way divorces, you know, most women end up on welfare because of divorce or incarceration in their families. They're not there because they want to be on welfare, they
Right.
fall on welfare. And they're devastated, and, you know, they don't know how to pick up the pieces. So I think all those things, but I have to applaud you, mentoring is the key, because we'll never make a government program to get people to do the right
Right,
thing.
yeah, that's right.
You know, it
Gotta
can
have
only,
the mentor.
government has to provide the opportunity, and people have to give the motivation.
Right.
I know we've talked a lot about poverty here in Empowering Women, and there's a whole nother conversation about how you empower women at that middle area, how they move up, and that's a whole nother discussion that we need to have, Mindy. Thank you for bringing us together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, taking the time. This is obviously a conversation that is ongoing, but also the solutions piece that Jen brings up, you know, it's so exciting, frankly, to hear about the progress that's been made, the opportunity ahead to make further progress. And I would just say, just to kind of keep us posted about how we can help.
Sure.
How we can help tell those stories, and provide those examples. Because to John's point, you know, the head piece is the really hard piece, the policy piece is really hard, but selling it to the American people is critical as well. So please lean on us. This is a tremendous group that's plugged in here today, so thank you all for coming.